Hello, and welcome back to the next episode of Overcome Yourself, the podcast. As you know, my name is Nicole, and I am so excited to be here with Perry today. Perry has an incredible story of overcoming. Let him take it away. Go ahead, Perry. Tell us who you are, tell us a little bit about your story, and then tell us who you help now.
Hey, Nicole. So, my story and primarily of what I do now is working with trauma survivors, ultimately helping them to find their voice. And for many people, it's just finding their voice through a journey of healing and transformation. Some other people, it's once they've found their voice, is then using their voice to create change and to create impact in the lives of other people. And I think when it comes to that type of work, it's usually come from a place of we've been there ourselves.
Mhm.
So for me, I went through sexual abuse as a kid by my step granddad, and was something that I didn't know was wrong. I didn't know what he was doing was wrong because of how he framed the whole thing and how he positioned himself and hashtag grooming, right? It would
Mhm.
so but it was my stepmom that caught it happening. And she was the one who then took me home, told my dad about it, and he confronted me, and then he sort of uh, silenced me. He told me not to speak about it. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell your mother, your biological mother. Don't go to school. Tell your friends. Just zip it.
Wow.
And I remember at that stage, it's weird because my dad at that point, he kind of became like the villain of the story, whereas really
Mhm.
that there should only be one person who was a villain of that story.
Yes.
And it I grew up kind of, my dad was a man's man, and I sort of wanted to be that sort of masculine version of a male growing up. And then what that eventually led me to see was, well, really, he was just hiding behind masks and, suppressing his own pain because stage where I was doing that myself and I was masking my own pain. I was hiding behind my own masks, and it got to a certain point in my life where I ended up breaking my silence. I ended up telling the person that I was dating at the time, told her about what I went through. I don't remember a single word that I said, but I know that it happened and that she welcomed me with open arms. And I kind of say that I broke my silence in three stages. Stage one was telling my partner. Stage two was a few months later, I went to like an in-person sort of online fitness mastermind retreat event. And when we was all sitting there in a semicircle, going around a room and introducing ourselves, I then, for the second time, shared my story then. Again, I don't remember what I said. And then the third time was driving home from that event, and I was like, I just need to get out my system. I just need to get it out there. I was working online on Facebook, and I did a video on Facebook, and that went viral and became what it is today.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I'm not excited that that happened to you, but I'm excited that you're here to share your story of survival and of using your voice because it is so important. Talk to me a little bit more about the importance of not being silent because it's really scary to put yourself out there, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, the consequences of living in silence outweigh the consequences of breaking it. Because the consequences of breaking the silence, it depends on the person's story. You have anything
Mhm.
from, well, your family could reject you, they could turn their backs on you.
Mhm.
If there's an abuser, they could come after you. Yes. And they're all very, very valid. However, the most important person is you. And I think as trauma survivors, we don't tend to put ourselves first, and we don't like to step out into the unknown. And finding our voice and using it is definitely stepping out into the unknown. But when you live in silence, that's where the trauma really grows. And once I, the best way I can explain is through the facts and a short story of how once that video went out there, then I went to my auntie's house, my dad's sister, and she says to me, you weren't the only one that was abused. And she told me that my dad was abused too as a child by
Wow.
the same man that abused me. So that right there, that was when everything came together and aligned. And because I was like, okay, so my dad lived and died in silence. That's why he became an alcoholic. That's why he told me to stay silent. And then everything started to connect. And So when people are living in silence, I tend to use my dad's story as an example of what can happen if you stay living in silence, which is having a heart attack, being an alcoholic, and dying before you're even the age of 50.
Wow. That is so powerful, Perry. Um, Talk to me about overcoming shame, because I feel like there must be a lot of shame
hmm
wrapped up in what happened to you, for so many reasons. So can you talk to me about how you were able to overcome that?
I think it's a bit of a mixture of a couple of things. I think one would be how I think I think for me personally in my journey, the shame started to kind of disappear when I shared my story multiple times, and when there was feedback from people, i.e., other survivors, I was just met with an overwhelming sense of positivity.
Hmm.
Now, and this is why I say, like in my book, I say about how if you're living in silence, I would recommend you don't follow the path that I went down. If you're living in silence, don't just go ahead and tell your partner. The reason why is because you can't guarantee what their reaction is going to be. And if they give you any type of inkling that they're rejecting your story, or maybe they're not, and they're trying to figure out how to reply back to you, so they pause, and a pause is not what you needed in that moment. Boom, you've now just associated and attached your truth that you've been holding on to this whole time with now rejection. And you will never ever share your story again, or is unlikely. So I was very, very lucky that I had a partner that met it with in open arms. So I would say, like to people about shame, is that starts to disappear when you're starting to break the silence to yourself first in as many different ways as possible. The more times you break your silence to yourself, the more times you take ownership over it, and the shame starts to disappear. And also the connecting with other people. As soon as you hear someone else's story that's similar to yours, the shame starts to be a bit more manageable, because shame tends to come from sitting with your story in a place of loneliness, right? So that's one. And then another one for me is dark humor. Dark humor massively, massively helps.
Totally agree. Yes. I have a very dark sense of humor as well. And I think yeah, because you know you can survive. I don't know. So there's just a comfort
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the dark humor sometimes, right? Oh my gosh, that is just amazing. So Perry, what tips do you have for someone who is overcoming themselves, rebuilding, picking up the pieces, they're rebuilding, they they don't want to end up like your dad, right? It's all about our choices. Like I in my book I talk about twin studies, and there was a set of twins, and the dad was like an alcoholic and was super mean, and then one twin was like, well, look at my dad, how could I have not ended up like him? And then the other twin was like, well, look at my dad, I just didn't want to end up like him. And you kind of alluded that to that a little bit, and you saw how this shame brought down your dad. And so what tips do you have for our audience that's overcoming and they're like, I don't want to be like Perry's dad. I want to be like Perry, and I want to be able to thrive after this because I'm still allowed to be happy, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the immediate answer that's coming to me is kind of what we brushed on, but I think it deserves to be brushed over many, many times, which is that if you are wanting to sort of heal, rebuild yourselves and start to change, well, really start to shed the version of you that's, gotten to this point and start to step into the shoes of the most powerful version of yourself, you will not be able to get there without writing, sharing, owning your story. Because up until this
Mm.
point, your story's owned you. And the
Oof.
way that your story owns you is because you're not allowing yourself to stop and confront that truth that you've been running away from. So as soon as you do that, that's why I do what I do now with helping survivors write their book, with writing books. It's not just writing the book, is you for the first time stopping there, confronting everything you've been running away from. With every single page that you're writing, you're taking ownership of the story that you've lived. And once you've gotten to the end of the book and you got it in your hands, that now becomes a trophy of the all of the battles that you fought, that you've won. And it is absolutely impossible. It is impossible for you to go back to how you was. Okay, because that version of you was trapped in a prison cell of loneliness and darkness. Now you're out. You're out of prison. You're out there in the world. It might be uncomfortable, but it's a different type of uncomfortable. So find your voice, and you do that through the process of sharing your story.
I love that. I love that so much. So that's like your thing, finding your voice. So tell us a little bit more about what advice you have for your clients when you're advising them on finding their voice.
So I guess so. I have something called as a brand called Be Powerful, and under Be Powerful, there's many different components. We've got powerful books, we've got powerful films, we've got powerful news, powerful merch. It's basically just a big platform for trauma survivors to be part of a movement, basically, is what it is, with all the different components. And I'll give you two examples. So one example is, let's just say somebody hits me up on Instagram with a DM saying, Perry, I'm heavily trapped within my family. I want to share my story. Hell, I want to write a book, but there's just no way I can do any of that anytime soon. What can I do right now? And for a lot of survivors, family is the problem, right? And it's not, and this is the thing. I'm not saying abuser, I'm saying family. Sometimes those are the same thing, yes. But it's more so the mum or the dad or the aunt, the guardian who doesn't want you to share your story because they don't want you to air the dirty laundry, as they would call it,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
You
Hmm.
sharing your story is in a way you sharing their story too. And
Hmm.
so and what I would and I'm like, it's tough, but it's almost comes back to the thing of, if you don't come from a supportive family, then you've got to make sure a supportive family comes from you instead. Because what's the alternative? Now the alternative is like, okay, mum, dad, I won't share my story because it's going to make you very, very uncomfortable. Cool. Now, if we fast forward 3 years, now that there's a difference from living in silence, not wanting anything to do with it, and putting your head in the sand, and then living in silence, very aware, you want to speak out. Now that's a different type of urge, because then you're going to grow this hatred towards your parents, saying, "How fucking dare you from stopping me to speak out?" Right? And that's just going to bubble up inside of you. And it's like, if your family's going to turn their back on you when you speak out, I'm sorry, but they don't deserve you in the first place, because there should be unconditional love is unconditional love, right? There shouldn't be conditions. And what they're doing is they're providing conditions. And that's very hard because, well, if I turn away from my family, I've got no one. And it's like, well, yes, but only for a short period of time. And also at the same time, no, because what you focus on becomes true. So if you're like, well, I'm going to be alone, then you will find loneliness. But if you're like, well, no, actually, there's a whole army of survivors out there who have found their voice and they are changing, lives are changing the world. How can I find a community to be part of who can have my back if that outcome ends up becoming the thing that happens? So it's just really plucking up that courage and just taking a stand for the first time in your life for you.
And you've created that space. You've created a place where people can go, because that's exactly what you were talking about with your videos, with, your
Mm.
podcast interviews, with your merch, with everything, with your books. Like, you are providing a safe haven for people to come and be together, and you provide community. So I think that is the most important thing that you could do. Like, I think I commend you because like, you've done it. Like, you went and you experienced something, and then now you're using that for good. It's like your superpower. Now it's
Yeah.
turned into your superpower, and you've learned to use it for good, and you're helping others. And I think that is so fantastic. I think that's so brave. And I'm so glad that you're here sharing your story with us, Perry. This is
Yeah.
amazing.
No, I
Can
appreciate it,
you tell
Nicole.
us? Yes, no, I appreciate you. And can you tell us a little bit more about your book?
Yeah. My book is called Breaking the Silence, which is this year. I published this, God, what year was it? I think it was 2020, 2021. I actually think I did it. I
Nice.
published it 2020, 2021 is when I published that. And I wrote that book from a place of purpose rather than a place of pain. I had been sharing my story
Mhm.
for a few years by then, and I wanted to just to find a different avenue to get my story out. And I put that book out there, became a bestseller on Amazon, and in the sexual abuse category, which was that was the main category that I wanted to try and hit number one in. I think it hit like number two in the other two, but I was happy that it hit number one in that one. And
Amazing.
yeah, it's done very well. 7, 8,000 copies since then sold, which is great. And this book has led to the whole brand. It led to a TEDx talk. It led to now a speaking career. I'm flying to Ohio next Friday to do a keynote talk at a conference. It's led to, and I guess most importantly, it's led to powerful books. That was when a survivor reached out to me and said, "Hey Perry, you've written a book. Can you help me write one?" And now we celebrated our 2 year anniversary a few days ago, and we published 20 books so far. We got over 80 people in our program, and we've just got people just changing. Narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, cancer survivors, child abuse survivors, just all getting their own unique messages out there into the world and creating impact.
That is phenomenal. I love it. It's like a transformation lab, and everybody comes and they
Yeah.
get what they need, whether it's community or whether it's learning to use their voice. Like, you're not just telling them to use your voice, you're showing them how to, you're teaching them how to. And then it's just so, so stinking powerful. I love it. That is amazing. Now, Perry, how can the audience hang out with you? Like, how can we keep in touch with you? How can we follow along? Because I know more greatness is coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what we got? We got my Be Powerful Media website. On there is a news section. So many of the survivors in our community post their own sort of advice and tips and tricks on there. So it's almost like its own news outlet. So you can check out Powerful News on the Be Powerful Media website. And then you can check me out on Instagram. I'm very, very active on there as opposed to any other social media platform. And then you also have a Facebook group, which I started, I think like back in 2022, maybe 2021, 2022. And it's called the Power Tribe, where survivors become warriors. It's on Facebook. And there's about 5,000 people in there. And they're all trauma survivors. And it's really a community where people use it to ask questions, whether it's legal matters or it's very much not a hub for, hey, how do I write and how do I find my voice? It's more of a place of, I'm wanting to go to the police, what are the legal statistics, or, I'm wanting to tell my mom what's the best way of doing it. So it's more so that sort of angle within the world of trauma. But it's a great
Wow, that is
community.
amazing. Yeah, yeah, that sounds like an incredible community. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No
All
worries.
right, and now before we sign off, Perry, do you have any final, like, what's the one big tip in finding your voice that you tell all of your clients? Like, what's the most important?
I think you can have all of like I can tell you exactly right now, here is how you break your silence. Here is how you write a book. And for a moment, you might feel like that's great and everything's going to change. And then you go to sleep and wake up and you're back into reality and you won't implement anything on that practical advice, right? We've all fallen to that many times, which is why I believe that the most important thing is about trying to figure out what the purpose is and making that purpose greater than the fears. Because it's the fears of the unknown, it's the fears of the reactions that's going to stop us from doing all of this. And it's not about getting rid of the fears because that's just make believe land. That's not going to happen. It's okay. I'm allowing space for the fears to be there. But what I need to lean into is what's the purpose behind why I want to find my voice? And it's about finding that and leaning into it so hard that it starts to overpower the fears. And before you know it, you're going to be like, I need to speak out yesterday, right? You'll skip dinner, right? You'll not even go to sleep because you need to figure out how to do this. That's the type of energy we need to be in. So that when our mum messages us and says, please don't do it, you're gonna look at it like, I appreciate that, mum, but I'm doing it. So get with the program, or that type of energy. So that's the best advice. Figure out what the purpose is and just trust in the universe that you'll get to where you need to go to.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, Perry, for joining us. This conversation has been just absolutely amazing because it's one thing to talk about the idea of, what do you do after you survive something like this? But to hear it from someone who has survived something like this, and just to know that there is hope, there is a future, after the darkness. I've been there. And so I know that it can feel hopeless and it is very confusing and there is a lot of shame. Um, but there is hope. And so like I said, I just commend you. I'm proud of you. I think you're so brave. And I think it's just amazing that you're doing what you're doing and not just speaking out, but helping others to find their voice as well. So I
Amazing.
commend you for that, sir.
Thank you so much, Nicole. You're very kind. Thank you.
No, thank you. And we will see you guys next time on the next episode of Overcome Yourself. Bye.